You're standing at the kitchen counter at 4 in the afternoon. The kids are circling. They're hungry again, and the box of crackers you bought on Tuesday is already gone. You feel it in your chest, that quiet math of how fast food disappears now. I'm going to show you how a family in the 1930s fed hungry children all afternoon for the price of a few pennies. Not junk, not empty air. Snacks that actually stopped the hunger and kept it stopped for hours. This is exactly how families lived when a nickel had to do the work of $1. And near the end, I'll give you the one they almost never wrote down, a hunger trick I found buried in a 1933 government kitchen bulletin that fills a child up before supper for almost nothing. If you're on a fixed income right now, watching this on your television, worried about the grocery bill, this was made for you. I still remember my grandmother's hands pressing a spoonful of something warm into a slice of day-old bread at that little enamel table, telling me, "Eat slow, it lasts longer that way." I didn't understand what she meant then. I understand it now. Let me take you back to that table, because everything I know started there. Here's the first thing that stopped me cold when I finally paid attention. A hungry child in 1932 was not fed more food. That child was fed smarter food. There's a difference, and we forgot it completely. My grandmother was a little girl during the worst of it, in a coal town where the mines ran 3 days a week if you were lucky. She told me the afternoons were the hardest because dinner might be thin and far away, and a child's stomach doesn't understand economics. So the women of that town learned something that the food companies would very much like you never to relearn. They learned that fat and a little sweetness and something warm in the belly will hold a child for hours, while a handful of dry crackers is gone from the body in 40 minutes. Think about what you reach for when a kid says they're hungry. A snack pack, a bag of chips, a cookie in plastic. It vanishes, and 20 minutes later they're back, and you feel like you're feeding a furnace that never fills. That is not an accident. That is a design. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and I promised I wouldn't point fingers yet. Here is what my grandmother did instead. She took a slice of bread, even the tough end nobody wanted, and she warmed a little lard or bacon grease and spread it thin, then a pinch of salt, and sometimes a scrape of sugar over the top. Bread and drippings, they called it. A penny's worth of bread and a spoon of fat she'd already saved from breakfast, and that child would go back outside and not come in again until dark. The reason it worked is simple, and modern nutrition proves her right. Fat slows digestion. It tells the body the meal is real and it can wait. A slice of dry white bread spikes you and drops you. That same bread with a spoon of fat spread on it stays with you for hours. She didn't know the science. She knew the result, because she watched it in her own belly and in the bellies of every child on that street. Now most people hear lard and they flinch because we were taught to be afraid of it. Hold that thought, because who taught us to be afraid of it, and why, is a story I'm going to tell you before we're done. It's not the story you think, but bread and fat was only the foundation. Because the real genius came from the drink, and that's where this gets interesting. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed a child will say they're hungry when what they really are is thirsty and tired? The Depression mothers noticed. They noticed everything, because noticing was free and food was not. In that coal town, and in thousands of towns like it, there was a drink they mixed up in the hot months that did something a soda could never do. It filled the belly, it settled the hunger, and it kept a working body going through the afternoon. It cost almost nothing. My grandmother called it the field drink, though it went by a dozen names across the country. Out in the farm country they called it switchel, and it goes back long before the Depression, back to men working hayfields in the 1800s who couldn't stop for a meal. Here's what went in it. Cool water, a spoonful of vinegar, a spoonful of molasses or whatever sweet you had. And if you had it, a pinch of ground ginger. That's all. You stirred it in a jar and you drank it slow. The vinegar and the sweet together do something to the stomach. They take the edge off the gnawing. They steady you. Workers swore it kept them from that shaky, empty feeling long past when plain water would have left them weak. And the children drank a milder version between the thin meals. It cost a fraction of a penny. Compare that to what a family spends now on sweet drinks in a week, drinks that leave a child hungrier than before because they're nothing but sugar water with the fiber and the substance stripped clean out. That's the pattern I want you to see forming. Every single one of these tricks did more with less. They didn't just cost less, they worked better at the actual job, which was keeping a child full and calm and out from underfoot. And that is exactly the part that got erased. Because here's the question that started keeping me up at night once I got old enough to ask it. If these methods worked so well and cost so little, why did my grandmother's whole world of knowledge nearly die with her? Why did nobody teach me this in a home economics class? Why did I have to wait until she was old and I was middle-aged and the prices at the store finally scared me before anyone told me? Somebody profited from us forgetting. I didn't want to believe that for a long time. Let me show you how I stopped being able to deny it. Sometime after the Second World War, the food in the American kitchen changed, and it did not change by accident. The companies that made packaged food had spent the war years learning how to produce enormous quantities of shelf-stable product, and when the war ended, they had factories and no soldiers to feed. So they turned to us, to the home, to the mother at the counter at 4 in the afternoon, and they had a problem to solve from their side of the table. The problem was that a mother who knew how to fill her children with a penny of bread and fat and a jar of switchel did not need to buy their snack boxes. A woman who saved her bacon grease in a can on the back of the stove was a woman who wasn't buying anything, so the knowledge itself had to go, not by force, by fashion. They sold us the idea that the old ways were poverty and shame and backwardness. That lard was crude and dangerous. That saving grease was something dirty. That a modern woman opened a box and a bag and a can with a picture on it. My own mother, who learned everything at her mother's elbow, was made to feel embarrassed by it. She started buying the crackers. She started buying the sweet cereal. And by the time I came along, the chain was already breaking. Here's the number that made me sit down. In the 1930s, an American family spent around a quarter of everything they earned on food, and almost all of that food was raw ingredients they turned into meals with their own hands. Flour, cornmeal, fat, beans. Today we spend a smaller share of our income on food, and yet more of us feel squeezed by it than ever, because so much of what we buy is the labor and the packaging and the marketing, not the food. We are paying companies to do the very thing my grandmother did for free at that enamel table. You've felt this. You've stood in the store and watched a small bag of something puffed and salted cost more than a pound of the raw grain it was made from. You've wondered how that can possibly be. Now you know. You're not paying for food. You're paying to have forgotten how. But knowing the trap is only half of it. The other half is climbing out, and that's what the rest of this is. Because everything my grandmother knew still works. The prices went up. The methods didn't stop being true. So let me hand you the ones that matter most, the ones you can start with this week. Let's go back to the stove. Because the cheapest filling food in that whole era came out of one pot, and almost nobody makes it right anymore. Cornmeal mush. Now don't leave me, because I know how that sounds. In the 1930s, this one dish fed more children through more afternoons than anything else in the country, and it did it for pennies a bowl. You take cornmeal, which is one of the cheapest things you can still buy today, and you stir it slow into boiling salted water until it thickens like porridge. A pinch of salt, that's your base, and it's warm and it fills a belly the way dry snacks never will. Here's the part they knew that we lost. You don't just eat it as porridge, you pour what's left into a pan and you let it set overnight in the cold. By morning it's firm enough to slice. And you cut it into slabs and you fry those slabs in a little of that saved fat until they're crisp and golden on the outside and soft in the middle. My grandmother served it with a drip of molasses, or a spoon of whatever fruit had been put up. One pot of cornmeal, and you fed a child hot porridge one day, and crisp, fried cakes the next. 2 meals from pennies of grain, and both of them stick to the ribs for hours because the corn is dense and the fat holds it. The reason this fills a child when a snack cake can't is the same reason every time. It's real substance, and it's got fat with it, and it's warm going down. That combination signals the body that it's been fed. A cold, dry snack signals nothing, so the hunger comes right back. Now think about the cost. A bag of cornmeal costs a couple of dollars and makes, I don't know how many bowls. I've stopped counting because it embarrasses me how cheap it is next to what I used to hand my grandkids in a crinkly wrapper. But there's a catch to all this, isn't there? Because right now, some of you are thinking, that's fine for someone with a full kitchen and a free afternoon and energy to fry things at 6 in the morning. Some of you are on a fixed check. Some of you are tired, and the stove feels like a mountain some days. I know. So this next part I put here on purpose, for you. If you can't stand and fry, if you're counting every coin until the next check comes, here is the one to start with, because it needs almost nothing, and it needs no skill, and it needs no strength. Bread and warm milk. They called it milk toast. And it was fed to the very young and the very old and the sick. For exactly this reason, it's the gentlest, cheapest, most filling thing a person can make, and you can do it sitting down if you have to. Before I do, I want to mention something because if this way of thinking speaks to you, I've put much more of it together in a book called Depression Proof, part of a full collection that includes Deep Frugal and the Full System. It goes deeper into exactly this: the methods, the history, and the practical steps for stretching what you have without feeling like you're going without. You can find all the details in the description below. Now, let me show you how I stopped being able to deny it, because what happened after the war explains everything. You take a slice of bread, even bread that's gone a little stale, especially bread that's gone stale, because this rescues it. You warm a cup of milk, gentle, not boiling. You tear the bread into the warm milk, a pinch of salt, and if you have it, a little sugar or a drip of honey. That's the whole thing. The warm milk soaks into the bread and it becomes soft and rich, and it goes down easy, and it sits in the stomach warm and heavy in the best way. It'll hold a child, and it'll hold you for hours. Milk and bread are two of the cheapest things left in the store, and this uses the ends of the loaf that most people throw away. Nothing wasted. My grandmother said only a fool throws out stale bread, because stale bread is milk toast waiting to happen. She was mending our food and our budget in the same motion, and she made it feel like care, not like poverty. That's the part I want you to keep. There is no shame in this. This is skill. This is the skill they tried to make you forget so you'd keep buying the box. And once you've got that one in your hands, you'll want to know the trick that turns a plain potato into an afternoon's worth of full, because that one surprised even me. Everyone had potatoes in the 1930s, or could get them cheap, and everyone knows a potato fills you. But here's what they knew that we don't. It wasn't the inside of the potato they prized most for keeping kids full. Half the time it was the peel. Potato peelings, which we scrape into the trash without a thought, were fried, crisp, and a little fat and salted, and handed to children as a snack. And here's the thing that would shock a modern nutritionist, except that they've since proven it: the peel holds more of the fiber and the minerals than the soft inside. The Depression mother, throwing nothing away, was accidentally feeding her child the most filling, most nourishing part of the vegetable, the part we pay to have removed. Fiber is the other half of what keeps you full. Fat slows you down and fiber fills you up, and the potato peel is full of it. So a family would eat the potato itself in the soup or the hash, and the peelings became a crisp, salty snack that cost absolutely nothing extra because it was already bought and about to be thrown away. 2 foods from 1 potato. That was the whole philosophy. Nothing that came into the house left it as waste, until every ounce of use had been squeezed out of it. I want you to sit with how upside down we've gotten. We buy the potato, we throw away the most filling part, and then we drive back to the store and buy a bag of potato chips, which is the peel and the flesh fried in oil and salted, the exact thing they made for free from their scraps, and we pay a premium for it in a bag with a cartoon on it. We are buying back our own garbage at a markup. When I finally saw that clearly, I felt something between anger and grief. That grief is the whole reason I'm sitting here telling you this. Because every one of these methods was a form of respect. Respect for the food, respect for the work that bought it, respect for the child who needed it. And that respect was sold out from under us and replaced with convenience that costs us 3 times over. It costs us the money, it costs us the health, because the packaged version strips out the fiber and loads in the sugar. And it costs us the knowledge, so our own grandchildren won't have it unless someone stops and hands it back. So let me hand you more of it. Let me give you the sweet ones, because children need a little sweet. And the way they did sweetness in the 1930s will change how you think about a treat entirely. There was almost no money for candy. A store-bought sweet was a Christmas thing, a once-a-year thing. So the mothers made sweetness out of nearly nothing, and they made it fill instead of just flashing on the tongue and vanishing. The simplest was the sugar sandwich, and I know how that sounds to modern ears, but stay with me, because they were smarter about it than it looks. Bread, a thin smear of butter or fat so it would stick, and a scatter of sugar, sometimes with a little cinnamon if the tin wasn't empty. A child got that as a treat, and because it wrote on bread and fat, it actually held them, unlike the pure sugar of a modern candy that burns off in minutes and leaves them starving and cranky. The bread was the trick. The bread made the sweet last in the body. But the one I love most is the apple. Not a fresh apple in winter, because there wasn't one. Dried apples. In the fall, when apples were cheap or free from a neighbor's tree, my grandmother's family sliced them thin and dried them on screens in the sun or in the warmth above the stove, and those dried apple slices became the candy of the whole winter. Chewy, sweet, concentrated, and full of fiber. A child would gnaw one slowly, and it would keep their mouth and their belly busy for a good while, for the cost of an apple that would have rotted otherwise. You can do this today with almost anything, and an oven on its lowest setting, or one of those little dryers if you have it. Apples, pears, even the tomatoes at the end of the garden. It concentrates the sweetness so you need no added sugar at all, and it turns cheap fruit that's about to spoil into a snack that keeps for months. When I think of the fruit I've let go soft and thrown out over the years, I could weep. My grandmother never lost a single apple. Not one. Now, I've given you a lot. Bread and drippings. The field drink, switchel, cornmeal, mush, fried into cakes. Milk toast for the ones who can't stand at the stove. Fried potato peels, sugar bread, and dried apples. Every one of them real, every one of them cheap, every one of them tested by a generation that had no room to be wrong. But I promised you one more. The one they almost never wrote down. And to give it to you, I have to tell you where I found it, because it's the piece that turned all of this from nostalgia into proof. For years I thought these were just my family's tricks, the odd habits of one coal-town grandmother. Then I started digging, because I wanted to know if it was real or if I was just remembering an old woman fondly. And I found something. In the early 1930s, the United States Department of Agriculture had a division called the Bureau of Home Economics, and it was run by a woman named Louise Stanley, the first person to hold that job, a real scientist, put in charge of figuring out how American families could survive on almost nothing without their children going hungry or getting sick. Her people went into homes. They measured what families actually ate. They wrote it all down in plain little bulletins with prices and portions, and they mailed them out to millions of struggling households in the darkest years of the Depression. This was the government, in 1933, quietly teaching the exact science my grandmother learned at her mother's elbow. It was all real. It was studied. It was written down. And then it was allowed to disappear, buried in archives, while we were sold the idea that our grandmothers were just poor and ignorant. And here is the trick from those pages that I had never heard anywhere else, the one that fills a child before supper for almost nothing. It's about timing, and it's about warmth, and it costs less than a penny. A small cup of warm, thinned broth, or even just hot salted water with a little fat stirred in, given to a child about a half hour before the meal. Not a big drink. A small, warm cup. The warmth and the salt and the tiny bit of fat trip the body's fullness signal early, so the child arrives at the thin meal already partway satisfied, and that small meal is enough. They called it taking the edge off, and it stretched a pot of soup, meant for 4, across a table of 6. Think about what that solves. The hardest moment for a struggling family isn't the meal, it's the hour before the meal, when the children are wild with hunger and you're watching the pot, knowing there isn't quite enough. That warm cup, 30 minutes early, calmed the storm and made a small supper feel like plenty. It's not a trick to skip food. It's a trick to make modest food satisfy, so nobody leaves the table still aching. And a version of it shows up right there in the Bureau's own guidance, because the science is real warmth and fat, and a little salt signal the body sooner than volume does. I tried it on my own grandchildren the week I found it, half not believing, and it worked exactly as those old pages said it would. They came to supper settled instead of frantic, and a pot that I'd have sworn was too small went around with enough. I sat there afterward feeling like I'd shaken hands with a scientist and a grandmother who'd both been dead for decades, both of them reaching across all those years to feed my table. That's the moment I understood what I'd been given. This knowledge didn't survive because it was written in a book everyone kept. It survived because a few people at a few kitchen tables refused to let it go and passed it hand to hand, mouth to ear, while the rest of the world was busy being taught to forget. My grandmother was one of those people. And now, whether you meant to be or not, so are you. You didn't just learn some old recipes today. You took back a way of thinking that somebody worked very hard to make you feel ashamed of the idea that feeding your family well and cheaply is a skill, an honorable one, and that the most filling food isn't the food that costs the most. If you're the kind of person who's always felt in your gut that the convenient answer was quietly robbing you, that the real wisdom got pushed aside so you'd keep paying and keep depending, then you were already one of us before you clicked. This is just you coming home to it. Now I want to hear from you, and I mean this. Don't just watch and drift off, because this audience never says a word, and I want yours. Tell me one thing. Did your family have a version of any of these? The bread and drippings? The milk toast? The fried mush? Or was there one I didn't name, the snack your mother or your grandmother made from almost nothing that held you all afternoon? Leave it in a comment right now, because someone reading needs exactly that trick, and it might die with you if you don't. And tell me where you're watching from, because I like knowing which corners of the country still remember. If this reached you, subscribe and stand with the people who are digging this knowledge back up out of the ground where it was buried, one method at a time. Because next I'm going to show you the way they kept milk and butter from spoiling through a whole summer with no refrigerator and no electricity, a cooling trick so simple you'll wonder why every house doesn't still have one. It kept a family's food safe for pennies, and it's waiting in the same old bulletins, ready for me to hand it to you. Don't let it stay lost. I'll see you there. Before you go, let me tell you where this goes next. Inside the Hard Times Circle, I share the full 1930 snack playbook, recipe by recipe, including that buried government bulletin trick in full. And you can ask me your own question. And a real person, me, answers you myself. You belong here with thrifty folks like you. Just point your phone at the code on screen. Cancel anytime with one click.